Welcome to the URI Harrington School SolveClimate webinar. Please remember to like, comment, and share. And now a bit about the Harrington School.
At URI's Harrington School of Communication and Media, every day is an exploration.
With global learning opportunities
and high-profile internships,
Harrington prepares us to be critical media consumers
and creative media producers
in the rapidly changing 21st century marketplace.
in strategic communications,
in multimedia journalism,
In sports media,
in writing and rhetoric,
in information analytics,
in digital media, film, and TV.
Our tight-knit learning community is tailored to build a solid foundation
for powerful creative communication,
and a lifetime of achievement and opportunity.
Wherever our passions lead. Discovery, opportunity, impact.
The Harrington School of Communication and Media at the University of Rhode Island.
Visit today.
I am Norbert Mondorf, Interim Director of the Harrington School of Communication and Media at URI. Welcome to SolveClimate 2030. Today, similar events will take place in each of the 50 states and in numerous countries around the world. Just this week, we learned that CO2 in the atmosphere is reaching a new critical level. Climate change is a major threat to our environment, society, and economy. As the pandemic has shown, being prepared is pivotal to our survival and the quality of life for future generations. Today, 3 Rhode Island experts will talk to us about climate solutions, just transitions, and green recovery. I'm excited that so many of you are joining us today from URI, from colleges and high schools around the state, and from all walks of life. We hope that you will not only learn about these topics, but also act on them. If you are a student, challenge your teachers to make climate a class. As a teacher, do your part to make climate a class. As a community member, make your own choices to embrace climate solutions in your personal life, at work, and in your surroundings. Get involved in the many policy initiatives at the local, state, and national level and support the transition into a sustainable and resilient future. Now, meet Emily Diamond, Professor of Communication Studies and Marine Affairs at the University of Rhode Island. She will introduce today's speakers and moderate our discussion.
Thanks very much, Norbert. This is a monumental week in Rhode Island with the passage of the 2021 Act on Climate Bill, which will provide a pathway for our state to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So with that overhang, I'm really pleased to welcome here today 3 panelists who are leaders in sustainability and climate change in Rhode Island. Each one of them will share with us a little bit about the work that they have been doing to make Rhode Island a leader in solving climate change by 2030 through a focus on climate solutions, just transitions, and a green recovery. Our first speaker is Priscilla de la Cruz, a Providence resident and the Rhode Island director of the Green Energy Consumers Alliance. The Green Energy Consumers Alliance enables people and communities to access green energy choices in cost-effective and seamless ways. Ms. De La Cruz leads a small team based in Providence and performs strategic management and marketing, as well as coalition organizing in the local energy and environmental communities. She's a trusted advocate on clean energy and has worked to advance community choice aggregation in the Ocean State for the past 4 years. In June of 2019, she was elected as president of the Environmental Council of Rhode Island. Priscilla earned her BA in Business and Marketing at Rhode Island College and a master's in liberal arts with concentrations in management and sustainability from the Harvard University Extension School. Please help me welcome Priscilla.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Emily. I'm really pleased to be here with you all today. I'm going to go ahead and put my slides in presentation mode. So thank you for that introduction. As Emily mentioned, I am the Rhode Island director at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. And a little bit more about us in my role at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. So for about 11 years, I've been fortunate to work with a small group of staff based out of Providence and Boston who are dedicated to our mission of speeding the transition to a low carbon future. I like to describe how we do our work in two ways. There's the program side of our work where we offer green energy choices like discounts on electric cars, green electricity for individuals and communities, and many other green energy programs that enable over 20,000 members and participants across Rhode Island and Massachusetts to easily access more cleaner and cost-effective options. And it is truly that experience of our members and participants that drive our advocacy work and the role that we play in policy at the state level in both Rhode Island and in Massachusetts. So I want to go ahead and just show this graphic just to paint a picture of the work that we have here to do in Rhode Island in terms of reducing emissions and getting to net zero by 2050. And this is a graphic that we borrowed from the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. So Emily touched upon what a great milestone Rhode Island has achieved in passing the 2021 Act on Climate. So just to put into perspective, as we look at what it will take to get to net zero by 2050, showing the sources of our emissions and where they come from, and also what it will take over the next 10 years and the 10 years after that in order to get to net zero by 2050. The good thing is that we know it's achievable. We know that we can get to 45% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and 80% reduction by 2040, and then getting to net zero by 2050. And that's exactly what's in the 2021 Act on Climate bill that was recently passed by both the Senate and the House, and it's now headed to the desk of Governor McKee, who has expressed his commitment to signing the bill as it was passed by both chambers. So why is this so big for Rhode Island? Well, because it provides the foundation and the framework we need to really reduce emissions and transition us to a green economy in an equitable way. And that is through a comprehensive plan to address the climate crisis with a plan that is economy-wide across the board and is enforceable and really accounts for a just transition to a green and sustainable economy, really ensuring that we're not leaving anyone behind when we're looking at the impacts to frontline workers and also frontline communities that are disproportionately facing the burden of climate change in our state and across the nation and the world. So in terms of the 2021 Act on Climate bill, it really does position Rhode Island to no longer be a laggard behind states like Connecticut and Massachusetts that passed mandatory and enforceable emission reduction targets and did so about 13 years ago. So other states are moving forward and signaling that they're ready to take advantage of current and future federal stimulus and the Biden administration's commitment to clean energy jobs that truly center around a green recovery, strong labor and union standards, and last but not least, social and racial justice, and really putting that at the center. So a great example that I implied is taking place in Massachusetts. Massachusetts passing mandatory and enforceable targets, as I mentioned, over a decade ago, and actually recently updating those targets and passing the Next Generation Climate Roadmap bill into law last week, or the previous week after that. it all becomes a blur during the pandemic. But what's significant in this is that Massachusetts, through their version of the Global Warming Solutions Act that is similar to our Act on Climate bill, updated those targets, but also incorporated environmental justice, increased commitment to offshore wind, increases to their renewable portfolio standard, appliance energy efficiency standards, low income and business solar incentives, and so on and so much more. So by passing the 2021 Act on Climate, Rhode Island has now signaled that it's ready to take real climate action and create similar paths toward a strong green economy as we work through the pandemic and recover from its economic impacts. So I'll just quickly focus in on the transportation sector in terms of how it accounts for the majority of our greenhouse gas emissions here in Rhode Island, and just showing this and centering this because there's a lot of work to do on the transportation side. We have not yet, as Rhode Island, begun to figure out how we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, the Act on Climate provides the framework and the foundation and telling us where we need to be in terms of the science, but now we have to implement. We have to look at incentives for electric vehicles, green electric vehicle infrastructure improvements, add public transit as well. And I'll talk a little bit more later on about the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is a regional policy to discourage fossil fuels and fund clean transportation and the role that Rhode Island is playing in that regional effort. So just quickly looking at the electricity sector, where we've done most of our decarbonizing work here in Rhode Island, we need to continue investing in energy efficiency. We need a firmer commitment on appliances and electrifying our buildings as well. And we need to build upon the 100% renewable energy standard executive order that was passed by our previous governor, Gina Raimondo, in getting to that goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2030. We need more offshore winds. We really need to build on our expertise in making the first offshore wind farm happen in Rhode Island off the coast of Block Island. So that was a small grand step in the right direction in terms of Rhode Island being home to that first offshore wind farm in the coast of Block Island. But now we need to do a lot more in order to really reduce emissions. And we also need to ensure that we have strong policies that reach that balance between adding more solar, but also protecting open space. So this is just to show where the remaining of our emissions come from when looking at the heating and cooling sector, and also building upon the heating and sector transformation report that was released in April of 2020. So one thing that Rhode Island has done really well is conduct a number of studies. So we have the solutions, we know how to get there. Now it's time to implement and really build on the recently passed Act on Climate bill. So I'll continue moving along for the interest of time here. So again, just to emphasize, we have the solutions. We know what we have to do in order to accelerate climate action in Rhode Island. There are so many studies, as I mentioned. And one of the things that I'd like to keep in mind when thinking about the economic benefits that will come from transitioning to clean energy is that our state imports fossil fuels. We spend well over $3 billion importing fossil fuels. So just imagine the impact of those dollars if they were circulating our local economy. And that's without considering the major new investments that will come from the federal government. And also just emphasizing that we need to show that we're ready in order to take advantage of the Biden administration's clear support for clean energy job creation and ensuring that we're ready to go. And again, the Act on Climate is that first step in showing, yes, we're creating a path and we know what we have to do in order to get there. So I'm just going to go ahead and show a really quick cheat sheet of our policy priorities. So we've already emphasized the Act on Climate and what a big step that is, and historic step for Rhode Island, considering that 7 years ago we passed the Resilient Rhode Island Act, which set non-binding targets. And now we're bringing the science up to par. We're also ensuring that there's enforceability, transparency, accountability, and also social and racial equity into consideration and deep integration into our plans for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also creating the clean energy opportunities that we need. I will also focus on 100% renewable electricity by 2030. That's existing legislation that's being proposed and one of our top priorities. I'll also talk a little bit more about the Transportation and Climate Initiative. And last but certainly not least, an extension to the least cost procurement law that drives our energy efficiency programs that account for most of the clean energy jobs in our state and significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, as well as savings to consumers. So it's really imperative that these programs are protected and extended and really ensure that Rhode Island can continue to effectively implement our energy efficiency programs. Also of relevance is appliance efficiency standards proposed in Rhode Island yet again this year. A simple bill that brings our water and efficiency standards up to date on an increasing number of appliances that would also provide savings to consumers and small businesses. And just again, emphasizing that Massachusetts has passed appliance efficiency standards. So next, want to just go ahead and take a closer look of what the impact of 100% renewable electricity by 2030 would be. First, we need to extend our renewable energy standard. That requires the ability to include renewable energy sources in its electricity mix and bring that to 100% by 2030. A recent study published by the Office of Energy Resources confirms that, yes, this is ambitious, but certainly doable. And our previous governor, as I mentioned, passed an executive order. Now we just need to make that legislatively enforceable. So again, imperative because we're going to truly reap the benefits, the economic and health benefits of decarbonizing all sectors economy-wide, as the Act on Climate says we need to do to meet the challenge of climate change. But we need to fully decarbonize the electricity sector. That is really key in order to decarbonizing all the other sectors. And again, doable, especially with the recent announcement of 600 megawatt offshore wind procurement that happened last fall, early winter. And what's already encouraging to me is that the existing procurements and policies that we have in place will get us 82% of the way to that goal. So we can close the gap with strengthening policies and including rooftop solar, as well as public solar on public buildings. Again, Rhode Island needs to demonstrate that we're ready. The states that are well organized and prepared will gain the most from federal stimulus. So just really quickly want to highlight that the Commerce Rhode Island shows strong job numbers when it comes to the offshore wind sector, creating between 20,000 to 35,000 jobs along the East Coast by 2028. So Rhode Island is already developing such jobs, right? Looking at our example with the first offshore wind farm off the coast of Block Island, and also tapping into the educational programs in our universities. And again, going back to the commitment of the Biden administration to double offshore wind production in the nation by 2030. So we need to really not only tap into those federal dollars, leverage our own dollars and expertise, but do this all while creating more clean energy jobs with strong wages, a focus on racial equity, and strong labor standards. All right, so just really quickly shifting gears, but still relevant to the electricity sector. So we know that with procurement commitments and contracts coming, for example, from Revolution Wind for 100% megawatts and other offshore wind projects, this will all be great for Rhode Island. But we also know that we can continue to do more in terms of creating more demand for renewable energy right here. And that's through tools like the Green Municipal Aggregation model, also known as community choice electricity aggregation, which is another way to spur the growth of renewable energy by creating more demand that is voluntary demand that will get us ahead of state policy beyond what the renewable energy standard requires. So very simply, what this does is enable cities and towns to aggregate the bulk purchasing power of their residents and small businesses to stabilize electricity supply costs, make them more competitive, hopefully resulting in strong savings while adding the local procurement of renewable energy. So just pointing out that, again, we know what we have to do, and cities and towns are taking that initiative, first with Providence, Central Falls, Barrington, South Kingstown, which recently introduced their plans to the Public Utilities Commission for review, and hopefully are set to be in a track for approval in the coming months. And now we need other communities to follow suit. So shifting gears very quickly to the transportation sector, in terms of another tool yet in our climate action toolbox is the Transportation and Climate Initiative, or TCI. In short, how it works, there would be a gap on pollution, polluters pay, then that revenue collected is invested in communities and passed on in the form of community benefits, both economic and health benefits, and also jobs. So far, Rhode Island, along with Connecticut and Massachusetts, and are a part of that initiative, and we're hoping that others will join that effort. But what's key to pointing out is that this will lead to more investments in better and electrified transit service, more mobility, including options in terms of walking and biking. As I mentioned earlier, we need more incentives around electric cars and charging infrastructure, and very significant, bringing in $20 million a year for clean mobility. So this is something to strongly take into account as a tool that we need in order to drive down emissions. And also considering that for many Rhode Islanders, the only option right now is gas-powered cars and public transit as well. So how do we electrify and clean up transportation and enable other options that are affordable and provide those economic and health benefits? So quickly, just want to point out that in terms of climate mobilization, the Environment Council of Rhode Island, also known as ECRI, which is that umbrella organization for about 70 nonprofits in the state, including individuals, formed the Climate Crisis Campaign. One of my other roles is serving as president of ECRI, as it was mentioned earlier. So the Climate Crisis Campaign just calls for an immediate governmental action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, create jobs and a just transition, and also protect the places we love. So the Climate Crisis Campaign, along with the Environment Council of Rhode Island, made the Act on Climate its top priority last year and this year. So now we're ready to build upon and really look at how we're going to work together to implement the Act on Climate, and also working with the network of now 29 plus organizations and businesses that have endorsed the Act on Climate. And also quickly just showing how it all comes together in terms of building momentum on climate action. So we've talked a lot about what happens at the policy level. Something that Green Energy Consumers is an expert at is the individual action coming from consumers when we tap into green energy options. And then I've referenced coalition. There are many coalitions out there. They all play a very key role in moving the needle in terms of climate action. I've referenced the ones that I play a role in, like the Environment Council of Rhode Island, the Climate Crisis Campaign, and also how that drives and turns into community action, and just concerned folks, and in terms of folks that are concerned about climate action, and knowing that Rhode Islanders, the second most pressing thing that they're concerned about is climate action following the pandemic. And then how do we form those unique partnerships in order to really drive these policy and community engagement levers? And one that I will point out, I am pleased to share that I am the co-chair of Climate Jobs Rhode Island, along with Patrick Crowley at AFL-CIO. This coalition was formed in 2021 as a coalition of labor and environmental organizations working together to establish what I've been referencing throughout the presentation, a just transition to a green economy in Rhode Island. We know we can do this working together. We know that we can develop a 21st century economy grounded on economic principles, environmental principles, and racial and social justice. I will conclude there in the interest of time. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. Great thought-provoking presentation. I want to remind everyone, if you have questions as we go through, please add them as comments on YouTube or Facebook, and we have some people monitoring them. We're going to try to build in some Q&A from the audience at the end here. Okay, next we welcome Yasmin Yacobi. Yasmin is the Energy Justice Program Manager at the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources, Rhode Island's lead state agency on energy policy and programming. Her role focuses on the equitability and accessibility of Rhode Island's energy systems, programs, and policies. She works to ensure that all people have access to clean, affordable, and dependable energy, and that frontline communities can shape their energy future. She is working together with members of her department, other state agencies, and community members to strengthen support for frontline communities and communities of color. Ms. Yacobi is a Govern for America Fellow and graduated from Harvard University with honors in May 2019 with a BA in Environmental Science and Public Policy. In her spare time, she loves to hike and knit, and she is a freelance light designer for various theaters in the Boston and Providence area. Thank you, Yasmin.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Let's dive right in, shall we? Thank you for that introduction, and we will get started. What is a just transition? A just transition is the concept that builds on energy and environmental justice. Both those concepts say that everybody should have access to a healthy and clean environment, and that everybody should have access to clean energy and energy in general. Generally, a just transition is a transition away from an extractive economy to a regenerative one. It's a transition away from the fossil fuel economy to a new economy that provides democratic governance, ecological resilience, and personal resilience. It's one that builds sustainability and brings everyone along. And it's honestly the only way moving forward. So before we dive into how to get there, I want to give a quick set of definitions and just define the difference between equality and equity. Equality is often used to mean giving people the same resources regardless of their situation. Equity, meanwhile, is about ensuring that everybody has what they need to succeed. That will mean expending more efforts on some communities than others to ensure they too have fair opportunities for a healthy life. I personally really like this graphic because it shows that not everybody starts with equal footing. There's a fence that shows institutional discrimination and barriers, and the ground is situational differences. It's really important to keep in mind that we do not have equal footing starting out and equal access, but that's what we're trying to strive for. So what does energy burden look like in Rhode Island? Energy burden is the percent of your household's income that goes towards your energy bill. On average, in the state of Rhode Island, you can see that approximately everybody pays 3% of their household's income to energy. In New England, it's about 3%, and actually in the United States, it's between 2 and 3%. But I want everybody to just take a look and at this map and remember the places that have high energy burdens. And I want to take a moment and contextualize why certain communities have higher energy burdens and higher disproportional impact of environmental issues. It's critical to recognize that none of this is coincidental. This history goes all the way back to race-based slavery, which Rhode Island was heavily involved in. Rhode Islanders had more per capita slaves than any other New England state. And Rhode Islanders traders controlled between 60 and 90% of all North American trade in slaves, especially after it was made illegal by Rhode Island and then by the United States government. Slavery might feel like a thing of the past, so let's talk about something a little more recent, redlining. Redlining is the practice of limiting lending in certain neighborhoods, regardless of the creditworthiness of individuals living there. It was once a practice that was routine. And the thing that makes redlining the most problematic is that the neighborhoods that were defined as declining or undesirable meant that people in those neighborhoods couldn't get a mortgage. Those neighborhoods were often communities of color. Even if there was a single Black household in that community, it was deemed declining or undesirable. All white neighborhoods were viewed as safe property values, and banks therefore gave them loans. Homeownership is one of the most important and successful ways to entrench people in the middle class. It builds up wealth that can be passed down through generations. So the history of redlining is a history of providing favorable lending and access to financing for white residents in all white neighborhoods and preventing minority populations from building credit and trapping them in a rent cycle. So while slavery might feel like a thing of the past, Redlining is a very tangible thing that started happening in the 1930s that continued up until 1968 and was banned with the Fair Housing Act. But it has significant impacts in Rhode Island today. So why does this all matter in the energy sphere and the just transition sphere? Well, the 4 cities and towns that were redlined in Rhode Island were Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls, and Woonsocket. Those same cities have the highest number of residents of color. They are the communities that are the poorest by far in Rhode Island. Those same communities have the highest rates of childhood asthma. Those same communities have older building stock, have higher exposure to lead, and have less efficient homes. And those same communities experience highest energy burdens. That's Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls, and Woonsocket. We need to ensure that we have a solid understanding of these historic legacies so that we can actively undo them. They were very intentionally done, and we need to intentionally undo them. How do we get there? So targeted universalism is one way to get there. The example on the screen is one that the city of Providence uses very frequently, and it's of the OXO kitchen appliances. OXO is one of the most popular brands of kitchen appliances out there. It was designed by a chef whose wife had arthritis. He designed a functional and minimalist peeler, but above all with a wide and flexible handle, which stays comfortable during repetitive gestures. So even though the OXO line is designed specifically for people with arthritis, the chef actually just made something better and more comfortable for use. That's the concept of targeted universalism, creating a universal goal, which is a better peeler, but creating it with a targeted approach, creating it specifically for someone who has arthritis. When we talk about targeted universalism, we're talking about ensuring that the most marginalized groups have access to the programs and policies we're trying to create. How does this tie back into the just transition? Well, when we're creating these programs and policies, we have to move and ways to move towards a new world. We need to be thinking about frontline communities, environmental justice communities, Black and Brown communities, and low-income communities. If we do environmental work with an eye towards racial disparities, we will be working on both problems at the same time. If we only focus on climate solutions and not on the racial disparities that exist within that sphere, we're actually going to continue to exacerbate the issues for BIPOC folks. And really, we are at an amazing point in time right now. We have a chance to recreate our entire energy system, as Priscilla was saying, but without intention, without equity at the center, we're going to design it to be unsustainable because it will continue to extract and oppress those same communities that have been oppressed in the past. What are we doing at the state level right now? The Office of Energy Resources is currently working to raise their own personal awareness. That's part of my work, is working internally with our staff to talk about exactly what we just talked about today, the history of Rhode Island, how racism and racial oppression has contributed to systems of oppression within the energy sphere, and how we can work to eradicate that. Alongside that work, we are also working to increase community engagement and community partnership. It's critical to recognize that we working on at the state level don't have all the information, and we don't have a lot of the knowledge that community members have. So we have to really work to make sure that their voices are at the table and being heard, and that those communities that have been historically oppressed have a way to shape their energy future. And I will just say, this is only the tip of the iceberg. On top of all our existing work, we need to thoroughly analyze our current and past programs and policies through an equity lens. We need to be thinking about how to assess those current programs and policies. We need to be thinking about metrics and doing a ton of work to continue to engage communities and make sure that they really have a say in what we are doing. And finally, we really need everybody's voice. We need to make sure that everybody is engaging in this as we're working to make our programs and policies more accessible and equitable. We need voices saying that just transitions are the most important thing for us to be striving for. We need to make sure that every single person is being brought along in this transition, that nobody is left behind, and that those communities that have been historically burdened are actually going to be thriving in the future. So with that, I will close. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll pass it back to you, Emily.
Great, thank you for that, Yasmin. I really appreciate it. Great things for us to think about as we continue our conversation. So last but not least, I'd like to welcome Rachel Calabro, the Climate Change and Health Program Manager at the Rhode Island Department of Health. In that role, she helps Rhode Islanders prepare for the health effects of climate change through education, research, and supporting policy changes that help communities become more resilient. Ms. Glabro has been studying climate change and its effects for many years, working in both state government and the nonprofit sector as an environmental scientist. She has a master's degree in geology from right here at URI and a bachelor's degree from William Smith College. So Rachel, I will pass it off to you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today with everyone at URI and across the state. And thank you, Yasmin, for teeing up a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. We at the Climate Change Program are preparing for the human health effects related to climate change, and we are looking to create a healthy and sustainable and resilient future for all Rhode Islanders. We know that a lot of folks are not really thinking about how climate change might impact people's health, but we also know that a number of things are happening to our weather and to our climate that are definitely going to impact health now and into the future. So that includes our increased temperatures, our increased heavy downpours and rain. Moisture is becoming an issue in our homes. Spring is arriving earlier. We have more overall precipitation, but we also have flash droughts. We have a lengthening of the allergy season. So if you have allergies, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's more pollen, and that pollen is more allergenic. So all of that, we have an increasing that are active threatening, along changing the way it impacts our health. So we think of climate change as a risk amplifier. We see that there are areas that have higher rates of social inequities. And so the map on the left-hand side is our social vulnerability index for Rhode Island. And this shows a number of dimensions, including age, poverty, vehicle access, education, immigration, linguistic isolation, things like that, that all get combined into a metric to show where our most vulnerable populations are. And then on the other side of the slide, you can see a map of canopy cover. So this is where the trees are and aren't. You can see that in the most vulnerable communities, we are definitely lacking in tree cover. And that puts an added stress on the folks who live there, because we know that trees benefit our health, benefit our mental health and our physical health, our air quality, and the heat in our communities. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about trees, but first, let me remind you about the social determinants of health. We know that 80% of our health comes from our zip code, not from our genetic code. We know that neighborhoods, our education, the food we eat, our community, and our economics have the biggest share of how healthy we are. And in order to measure that, at the Rhode Island Department of Health, we're looking at these health equity measures. And to us, health equity means that everybody has the right to be healthy, and everybody has what they need in order to live a healthy life. So we are looking at 15 measures that look at determinants of health in 5 domains, which I'm showing 2 of them here on this slide. Community resiliency, which includes voting participation, it includes housing, it includes the social vulnerability, and then in terms of physical environment, we're looking at affordability of transportation, we're looking at lead levels in children, and then, as I mentioned, we're looking at this tree canopy cover. So we are going to be creating a statewide goal for tree canopy cover, and this is one of our pledges to the U.S. Climate Alliance in the Natural and Working Lands section of our climate pledge. So we are actively working on that right now so that we can sequester carbon in our natural and working lands here in Rhode Island. And as Yasmin said, we know that environmental burden is not equal. And when we look at tree canopy, we can see that that burden is not equal. And we can correlate that with other environmental stressors. So in this case, I'm correlating, or I'm showing that next to a map of blood lead levels in children. And this is the city of Providence. So we're seeing areas in Smith Hill and the West End that have very high rates of blood lead. We're also seeing those are some of the areas with the lowest tree canopy. And so they don't necessarily correlate, but this is not by accident, it's by design. And Yasmin mentioned the redlining maps. This is the map for Providence. And when you see tree canopy cover, you can see that the east side has the most trees. It's the one of the few neighborhoods that was coded green in our redlining maps. So a lot of Providence was coded yellow, which means declining in these maps. And there was a significant amount of disinvestment in a lot of communities. And so the housing stock is old. We have accumulations of industrial facilities and things like that in very specific neighborhoods. So we have to start thinking about this in terms of how we're going to back ourselves out, how we're going to make sure that climate change does not hit these vulnerable populations more than others. So one of the things we did this past summer was we partnered with a group called Kappa Heat Watch from Portland, Oregon, and they sent us these little temperature monitors that we strapped to our cars, and we drove around Providence with a bunch of volunteers. We drove around Pawtucket, Central Falls, Providence, East Providence, a bunch of other communities, and we were able to get temperatures of ambient air. So ambient air temperature 6 feet off the ground and humidity so that we could get heat index and things like that. So we wanted to really see what's happening on the ground. You know, what are the temperatures that people are actually feeling? When we get a temperature reading, it's usually from the airport or from one temperature monitor somewhere, but we wanted to know what's actually happening in the community. So the folks that we partnered with, they put it into a model and do some math magic with it, and they get these modeled heat maps. So we were able to go through and see exactly what's happening in the communities to make them hotter. And so here you can see a picture of Pawtucket. This was a significant heat island area, the area near the apex. Very small trees, not a lot of trees, a lot of pavement. And then you can compare that with this other picture from near Blackstone Boulevard. And so you can obviously see that the height of the trees is different, the shading is different, and the cooling is different. And so we were seeing upwards of 10 degrees, 12 degrees, 15 degrees different between certain neighborhoods. And then you can also look overnight. So we did this throughout 4 different times of the day. We did it also at midnight, so we could see which neighborhoods weren't cooling off at night. And we saw a significant number of neighborhoods where temperatures were staying above 70 degrees overnight. And that's very dangerous for health. We know that after several days of temperatures in the 80s and 70s at night, hospitalizations start to go up. ED visits go up for everything from heart attacks to COPD and other health conditions and things like that. So this is very concerning, and we've been working closely with our health equity zones, which are place-based initiatives where we're working specifically in neighborhoods we know that have these social vulnerabilities. And we've been working to try to impact the heat and other issues in these neighborhoods. And so we worked with the Green Team. This is the Groundwork Rhode Island Green Team in Pawtucket and Central Falls. And they went and they surveyed their neighborhoods and asked people what were the issues that they were having, what did they need. And so folks mentioned things like access to food and flooding and needing trees and trash and other things like that. So this group decided that they were going to build raised planting beds, which you can see there. They installed rain barrels in people's yards so that they could prevent flooding in their basements. They did a tree planting at an elementary school. And so it's really a place-based initiative, a way to really get the community to buy in and figure out what they need to be healthy. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about trees, the impact of trees, because this is all about solutions today. And so if you look at Rhode Island's forests, there's 10,000 tons of air pollution per year that is removed by our urban and rural forests in Rhode Island. And that equals $33 million in avoided health costs. So we know that it's not just, it's a cost, health, every emergency department visit is an average of $1,300. We can add up all of those costs. We can add up the cost of hospitalizations. And we know that having trees and doing this work in communities saves us money. We know that the Rhode Island's forests offset the annual carbon emissions of more than 100,000 cars. And that's almost a quarter of the annual emissions of our passenger vehicles in Rhode Island. So it's a big deal. It's 27 million metric tons of carbon that is stored in our forests in Rhode Island. So I'm just going to conclude with a few key points because I know that you're all probably wanting to ask us questions, but when you're out there talking with your family, with your friends, these are some of the things, to keep in mind. Just talk about how climate change is happening now, how it affects human health and community resiliency. It does not affect all people equally, as we've seen today. And that addressing climate change will make us healthier, and it will save us money, and it will make our communities more resilient. And it's not too late, but we need to act quickly. So the most important thing is to talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk with your friends and your family. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have a master's degree in energy in order to talk about climate change. It's about all of us, and it's about understanding what our communities need and addressing those needs. So I think that is my slideshow, and I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm going to invite all of the panelists on stage now, and we actually have a couple questions from students pre-recorded, and so I'm going to bring those up and we'll hear what the students have to say and give you guys a chance to respond.
Hi, my name is Christina Casper. I am a communications major here at URI, class of 2021. My question deals with the intersection of environment and racism. Can you just talk a little bit about how minority groups are disproportionately affected by climate change here in Rhode Island? And are there any possible solutions to help combat this issue?
So I'll just open it up to anyone who'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I can start, and I can say that I think that we see that those disparate impacts exist. As Rachel's presentation showed incredibly eloquently, there are communities that are specifically Black and Brown communities and low-income communities that are most impacted by the heat island effect, that are most impacted by high lead levels and by asthma, by high energy burdens, and by other environmental impacts. In terms of what to do about it, I think that we need to take a very targeted approach in creating our solutions. We need to make sure that the steps we take center the needs of those communities and provide them the resources that they need first and foremost. And I'll turn it over to everybody else.
Thanks, Yasmin. Rachel, were you saying something?
You wanted to chime in? To go after you.
Yeah, sure. I'll just chime in quickly. You saw from our slides that there's definitely a burden on these communities, and you can see it not only in the heat island, but also in the health aspects of this. And so you have to, make sure that that the justice issue is multifaceted. It's about justice is about energy justice, it's about environmental justice and health justice and all of it. So you can't really separate them all. You have to sort of deal with them all together.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add that the pandemic showed us how communities of color are disproportionately impacted. Really, we've known this all along. It just really shed a different light in showing the disproportional burden and intersectionality of these issues when looking at climate, race, energy, transportation, the impacts of COVID-19. These are not standalone crises. They're all connected. And then I'll also add, in terms of something that I think about very often, is representation, and really ensuring that folks that are impacted the most are part of the solutions, that their lived experiences is expertise, because communities are dealing with the impacts now, and they know firsthand what they need in order to overcome, in order to really overcome the impacts that they're facing, and all by design, right? As Jasmine and Rachel pointed out earlier, and knowing that communities know what they need in order to thrive. So really listening to that with intention and really centering that in the policy decision making. And I think that's something that I think about very often, tell myself, and that's for all advocates, decision makers, policy makers, is really how do you center those lived experiences and really listen and incorporate that into the planning, and ensure that folks of color and those that are most impacted are at the table.
Excellent. Great. And Priscilla, I'm really glad you brought up that point about representation and how we need to think about these communities not only being the targets of policies, but actually part of the decision-making process and part of the design of these policies. So I appreciate all of your thoughts on that. All right, we've got one more question from Colin.
Hello, my name is Colin Tracy. I'm a junior double majoring in mechanical engineering and applied mathematics at URI. And my question is, what renewable energy industry would you recommend having a career in if you want to have the most profound impact on climate change? Thank you.
And we can maybe at first limit that to in Rhode Island.
That's a great question. I'll start off by saying I mean, I love all flavors of renewable energy. Like when we look at small impact hydro, when we look at solar and wind, I think in terms of potential in Rhode Island, and also that alignment between Rhode Island and the rest of the nation is offshore wind, and knowing the critical role that offshore wind plays in reducing our emissions, and that growing industry for Rhode Island and the rest of the nation. I think it's a fascinating one too when thinking about large scale wind development and offshore wind.
I would agree with that. Anyone have any additional thoughts? Otherwise, we've got some more questions on the way.
I would definitely agree and say that solar is another great place to dive in, especially when thinking about how to create wealth in communities that have been disproportionately burdened. Solar is a really great way to build that wealth and give people autonomy over their energy choices, whether it's rooftop solar or community energy in whatever form that takes.
Great. Well, we've got a couple audience questions that I want to highlight. And this first one is also helping our students who are not in obvious environmental majors think about what role they can play. So Malia asks, can you still have a powerful impact against climate change and environmental destruction without majoring in it or having a career in it?
Yes, absolutely. I think planting a tree, working in your community, joining a citizen group or any other, in your city or town, being a part of decision making, voting in your local elections is very important. All of that is a great way to support all of this work.
100% agree. I'll share. I don't have a background in environmental and energy policy besides my professional career. I did not major in sustainability for my undergrad, but definitely along the way tapped into the knowledge, the passion, and it ends up being what I do for work. And I often think about, if I were not in this role, what else, what would I be doing in order to provide that impact? What a great question. And I think about, all those points that Rachel brought up, and for me, it also goes back to as simple as having conversations with family members, with relatives, and really continuing to shed light on the climate crisis and being able to have those conversations across the board. I think it's really important. And also just getting involved in whatever shape or form you can, tapping into local networks and different campaigns, and petitions do make a difference. For example, a member of the Environment Council Rhode Island, Climate Action Rhode Island, spearheaded and helped organize a petition sign-on for the support to support the Act on Climate bill, and urging Governor McKee to sign it as is. And over 1,600 folks sign up to that petition. So, those numbers also matter in terms of folks showing and expressing their support.
Great. Yeah. And I'll just make a point that one of the big takeaways from the SolveClimate movement is that there's a role for talking about and addressing climate change in every discipline, in every class. Going forward, as we move further into the 21st century, every single discipline is going to have to be involved in environmental and climate change focuses. So I think there will be a lot of opportunities going forward. All right, let's bring up another audience question. This one is from Austin. Where do you think the greatest change can be made with regard to environmental impact? In larger, highly populated states like New York and California, or in reversing conservative policy in less populated states? I think if anyone knows the answer to this, then you can make a lot of money.
I like to think about, of course, there are smaller, bigger states, those that are more heavily populated. But when I often think about the ocean state and our, being the smallest state in the nation, I think that's our asset. And it just shows that, if we can really show that leadership and create the necessary models, tools, and implement those when it comes to offshore wind, solar, and really in terms of how do we create a robust clean energy and green economy, I think that only paints a model for the rest of the nation. And I like to think that, we can do our part, but we need all states to be part of the solution, regardless of the size or the population, that this is, something that across the board. And I love Emily's point about it needs to be across every industry, across every discipline. And I think that the Biden administration is showing that really well, that it's up to everyone to really help solve the climate crisis challenge.
Great. All right, I think we've got one more question from the audience. This is from Tricia. How can URI support a just transition and moving towards carbon neutrality by 2030? Any thoughts here about what universities maybe could do, or students in particular?
I think in terms of students, it's a little bit of what everybody has been saying all along is, get involved. Get involved in local politics, get involved in state politics, get involved on the national level. And if that doesn't make sense for you, then have those conversations. And these intersections, I think we've highlighted very clearly throughout all of these presentations. Climate change is not just a science issue. It is a health issue. It is a social issue. It really exists in every discipline. And so having these conversations at whatever scale is going to be critical, whether it's with that one family member who might disagree with all of your views, or whether it's with a friend who doesn't quite care just yet. Just have the conversation.
That's great. I really appreciate that. I think that students sometimes underestimate the power that they hold in having conversations with different people and having conversations with leadership and the administration. The administration is listening to you, so do something about it. Okay, so just to wrap up, we've asked each of you to think about what a call to action might be for Rhode Islanders who are concerned about climate change. So could I ask each of you to highlight one next step that you could recommend to Rhode Islanders for us to keep the momentum going? We'll start with Priscilla.
Sure. I'll offer I mentioned earlier, getting involved and tapping into different networks. One that quickly comes to mind is that climate crisis campaign that I mentioned. So RIClimatecrisis.org. You can go ahead and go to the site, read the statement. Again, in terms of numbers, playing a key role, sign up to support the statement. We were really focused, and will continue to be focused, on the implementation of the Act on Climate bill once Governor McKee signs it into law. But there are many other policies that we need to pass in order to implement and build upon the Act on Climate. So if you sign up for the Climate Crisis campaign, we will keep you informed, engaged, and we also host climate crisis advocate trainings that you could be a part of, and they're free to attend and participate in.
Great, thank you. Yasmin, final words?
Yeah, I think that very similar to Priscilla's call to action, it's get involved. As the Office of Energy is working to reform its public participation processes, as the states are trying to and working towards thinking on how to get to 2030 and 100% renewable electricity by 2030, we need your voice, and we need to hear that this is an important issue to you, to young people, to older folks, to everybody in the middle. We need to just hear that this is important. And specifically, we need to hear those intersections and the importance of those intersections. We need to hear that just transition is something that you want to see, that's something that you want us to fight for. So get involved in whatever way you can.
Excellent. Rachel?
Yeah, I second all of those remarks. And in terms of our tree goal, stay tuned for our statewide tree equity goal, and help us plant more trees and get your neighbors involved and get your communities involved in planting trees and supporting tree planting programs, and also protecting mature trees that are already growing, protecting our forests, sequestering carbon, eating locally, supporting local agriculture and soil health, and sequestering carbon locally in agriculture. it's very important to do all those things too.
Great. Well, I want to say a really big thank you to all of our panelists and to all of you who joined us and are watching today. I know that this session gave me a lot to think about and made me realize we still have a lot of work to do, but I'm excited to watch Rhode Island become a leader in the fight against climate change by 2030, by 2050. I just want to let everyone know that we're going to send out a thank you email to follow up with links to some of the organizations and petitions and policies that our panelists have talked about today, so that you can actually take some of those action steps. I also want to make a quick programming note about the Harrington School's next event in the Terracani Lecture Series. We're going to be hosting a conversation with CNN's John King at 5 p.m. on April 21st. So please mark your calendars and join us for that. And to wrap up, I'm going to close out with a video that was produced by the many student interns who have been working on the SolveClimate team across the country and across the world for the past couple months, including some of our own students here at URI. And this video will remind us to ask all of our teachers to make climate a class. Thanks for joining, everyone.
It's not really that bad.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Climate change, it's pretty close to home for South Carolina.
From the UK's wettest February on record to raging wildfires in California.
These winds die down. This fire is unstoppable.
Ferocious fires scorch terrain as Earth
Water
heats.
shortages forcing more than 13 million people to have to boil their water before they can use it. Marcus Moore.
It can take air out of my little brother's lungs.
What if it submerges my Bangladeshi land of love, magic, stories, and songs?
I'm afraid my hands can do nothing to stop the downpour.
I'm afraid it will leave us alone in a world of concrete and plastic.
Groom Gaia into a vacant void.
It will take the green and leave us in the dark.
I'm afraid it will bring out the worst in people.
Uprooting our families and communities.
Leaving our children to an irreversible nightmare.
Taking the beauty of each season from us.
Causing untold suffering that could have been prevented.
I am afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid. What are we being taught?
What are they teaching us?
Economics, literature, math, engineering, history, music.
What meaning do they hold if our climate swallows us whole?
I can be courageous.
I can be courageous.
I can use my voice and passion, keep fighting even on the days it feels hopeless.
I can fight for my people. I can hold on to the beauty we still have.
I can save our land against this man-made havoc.
I can be a voice for the sky, the soil, and the sea.
I can make a good future for our next generation.
I can stand up, even when it feels easier to sit down.
I can love my brothers and sisters and protect their lives, because we have the same mother, the great Mother Earth.
I can be louder than polluters that try to silence life.
I can do my part and leave others around me to do better.
I can ask my teacher to make climate.
I can ask my teacher to make climate a class.
I can ask my teacher to make
Make climate a class.
Make climate a class.